Welcome back to our 16th episode of the Atlanta Sports Podcast. My name is Frankie Maloof, and as always, I am joined by Luke Winstall. We do apologize for missing an episode last week, but we're back now ready to share with you the latest news surrounding the city of Atlanta and the state of Georgia's sports teams. So the college football was a little bit interesting week this week. Georgia and Georgia Tech both had bye weeks. So this week, instead of starting out with them, we're going to start off with Georgia State. Georgia State beat Tennessee Martin 31-6. It was homecoming for them. Something we learned from this game, turnovers are key. Georgia State won the turnover margin 4-2. They had 2 defensive touchdowns within 10 seconds of each other, which was huge. Now you see the 31 points, you might think it was an offensive onslaught by them, but that's not exactly what happened. They only had 285 yards of total offense. They're still struggling in the running game. I think they only had 110 yards rushing, which is still not as what you want to see, especially in a blowout win. Aaron Winchester, 8 for 16, 119 passing yards, 1 touchdown, and 2 interceptions. Winchester also added 75 yards on the ground on 16 carries. Darius Stubbs, 12 carries, 69 yards, and a touchdown. And then Glenn Smith was the leading receiver, 3 receptions for 45 yards, and also a touchdown there. So there was some good stuff in the offense, but I think the defense is what really saved the game here.
Yeah, the defense did a good job. I mean, Georgia State, like you said, overall had a very nice game. But, on defense, Michael Shaw, 8 total tackles, led the team. B.J. Clay returned an interception for a touchdown and had another. Trey Payne also had an interception. Martarius Allen had a fumble recovery for a touchdown. So defense really carried the team here. Offense has got to work, especially on that running game. Establishing balance is key in football. And the Falcons have really been a good example of that. They've had good balance on offense. So, it's just something for Georgia State to work on to try to get their offense more balanced between the run and the pass.
Right, and, they're still looking for that second straight bowl eligibility season, and I think they can still get to it this year. They've got all the pieces. They've been a lot better than what they started off the season. But like you mentioned, the running game, it's got to get going. If they can't get the running game going, then I don't think they will be as successful as they would hope.
Yeah, a bowl game would be huge for that program, and we're hoping all the colleges in Georgia can make it to a bowl game just as we cover all the teams. And it would just be fun to watch. It's big for a program in terms of revenue, builds the fan base a little bit, brings alumni back to the game to say, hey, let's watch this on TV or something. It's my old school. So it just really helps a program to get to a bowl game, and we hope that all the colleges, Georgia Southern, Georgia State, UGA, and Tech, all make it to a bowl game in 2016.
And we're going to move on to Georgia Southern now. They did beat New Mexico State 22-19. They were out in New Mexico. Kevin Ellison, 7 for 8, 101 yards, 2 touchdowns, and an interception through the air. He also added 117 yards on 20 carries rushing, which was the leading rusher for the team. Wesley Fields had 12 carries, 88 yards rushing. Matt Breda, 15 carries for 41 yards. He's the workhorse as always.
Yeah, good performance from that Georgia Southern offense getting the win. 22 points is good, but when your defense only allows 19 and keeps your team in the game, it's pretty big stuff. I mean, stats were good. Fields had 1 reception for 42 yards and a touchdown. Breda also had 1 reception for 9 yards and a touchdown. Keegan Williams, 2 receptions for 42 yards. And on defense, Chris De La Rosa had 10 total tackles, which led the team. All around good performance. Georgia Southern just needs to keep building. They stayed close to Tech last week, and they're trending up pretty much as always.
And I do think I expected them to win by a little bit more than they did at this point. They won by 3. I expected them to win by more than that. But, a win's a win. It's a conference win for them in the Sun Belt. They're still on track to possibly win the Sun Belt title, which in turn would also guarantee them a ball game because that would put them over the 6-win mark. And, just getting that conference title as well. They got it, I think, their first year up in the FBS, but they weren't eligible for the bowl game that year. But just getting one that actually counts this year, the bowl win, the Sun Belt title, that would be big for them. And also their field goal kicker, Younghoe Koo, as always, he's still perfect. He's 13 for 13 on the season. He was 3 for 3 field goals, 1 in each of the first 3 quarters yesterday. They had no touchdowns until the 4th quarter. Then they scored 2 touchdowns and came from behind to win the game.
Yeah, Georgia Southern, always pretty much a good football team. Usually have a decent amount of talent, but this year, Matt Breda, could be a potential top 3 round pick. We've talked about him a little bit And Southern just has to capitalize on him and use his last year, well, will likely be his last year, to their advantage so they can get to that bowl game, win the bowl game, win the Sun Belt if they can, and just be as successful as possible.
All right, so we're going to move on to some Kennesaw State. They did beat Gardner-Webb 47-39. Chandler Burks, 11 for 19, 207 passing yards, 2 touchdowns. Shaston Bennett, 7 carries, 76 yards, and 2 touchdowns. And Burks also had 14 carries for 72 yards on the ground. Shaston Bennett had 3 receptions for 110 yards and a touchdown. That was a leading receiver. So something that we got to talk about is their potent offense. They've had yet another game over 40. All of their wins so far, I think their least amount of points scored in a win was 36. Then they also put up numbers like 49, 47 here. They scored 52 points earlier this year as well. So their offense is really what's been carrying this team.
Yeah, it's a good thing. And you mentioned the defense for Kennesaw State just needs some work, allowing 39 points against Gardner-Webb. It's okay, but they've got to just do better. If the offense were to have a bad day and the defense were to let up 39 points, it's not going to be a recipe for success. So if they can just keep, as I mentioned with Georgia Southern, just keep trending up, keep building confidence, maybe getting more and more talent into the Kennesaw State program as it starts to build, I think we could see it become equal or better than how Georgia State has happened in the past couple of years.
Yeah, I agree. The one difference is school size. They're a little bit smaller than Georgia State is, so they might stay in the FCS a little longer. Yeah. But you saw what Georgia Southern did. They ran through the FCS for many years. They were always one of the better teams. Maybe we could see Kennesaw State become one of those better teams, like North Dakota State has been for the past few years in the FCS, really ruling the oh my gosh.
It's okay.
Really taking control of that division. So we're going to move on. The bye week for Georgia and Georgia Tech. Both of them got some much-needed rest. It's about the middle of the season for them. Georgia's coming off that tough loss to Vanderbilt, and Tech
coming off that win to Georgia Southern, over Georgia Southern.
Right. So Georgia will play Florida in Jacksonville next week. That'll be definitely one of the better games of the year, you'd hope, if you're a Georgia fan. Jackets have Duke at home next week, so they need to take care of business there. So big games for both of those teams. It probably comes at a good time, this bye week did. So we'll have to look forward to them coming up next week, and we'll have to see how they rebound off of this rest that they got.
Okay, so Georgia-Florida game, always a good one, especially with it being a rivalry game. This year, Georgia actually has a starting quarterback playing the game, hopefully, Jacob Eason. He's exciting to watch. Just, it depends on whether he's going to have a good day or a bad day, and the way that is set is whether the offensive line can block. That's really what it comes down to. Because if the offensive line blocks well, I know Florida has a talented defense. They pretty much always do. They recruit very well on both sides of the ball, but especially defense. And if UGA can block their linemen, their linebackers, get to the second level, and get the run game moving, a game over 100 yards for Nick Chubb would definitely be preferred. And, for Sony Michel, too. So if they could do that and set up the passing game a little bit, let Easton get settled in as a freshman playing in one of the bigger games he'll play in this year, it's just going to be good. So if the offense can get that set, then they'll be fine. They'll give Florida some good competition. But if that line doesn't block, it's all in the defense. And, it's just going to be tough against Florida that has a good offense this year and can put some points on the board.
And, for Tech, I think one key is, again, getting their offense going as well. Because if you look back versus Vanderbilt, they scored 38 points. The offense was really clicking there. So everything was good. And then you keep going. You only scored 7 points at home versus Clemson. That was on Thursday night. Tech needs to get their offense going because if not, I think they're going to be in trouble. They're not really going to win many low-scoring affairs. I think that their job right now and what they've been working on is to continue to get their offense going. They did score 35 points versus a lesser Georgia Southern team. And then also they scored 34 on the road at Pitt, but their defense gave up the 37 there. So I think Tech's going to have to win a shootout in most of the rest of their games. They get Duke, and then they get North Carolina and Virginia Tech. I think both of those games will be good as well. But coming up this week, they need to take care of business against Duke to stay in the hunt in the ACC. So we're going to move on to some Atlanta Hawks, your 2016-2017 opening day roster for the game that starts on Thursday at home in Phillips Arena versus the Washington Wizards. Kent Bazemore, DeAndre Bembry, Malcolm Delaney, Tim Hardaway Jr., Dwight Howard, Chris Humphreys, Kyle Korver, Paul Millsap, Mike Muscala, Taurean Prince, Dennis Schroeder, Mike Scott, Thabo Cephalosha, Tiago Splitter, and Walter Tavares. That is the official roster now for the opening day. They made their final cuts. And anything to add about that one?
Yeah, I mean, roster looks good. The Hawks will be a playoff team this year regardless. There's no way they're a 10 seed. I saw that on ESPN. That is absolutely ridiculous. They're at worst a 7. That's if they have a bad season. Dwight Howard in the preseason. I know the preseason doesn't tell you a lot, but he's performed. He's out-rebounded pretty much everybody. Good as a scorer. He can take over the game at times. And the Hawks finally have their superstar. I'm really happy and proud of them for that, general manager and that front office to go and get that guy. I think they can build around Dwight at least for 1 year. I think probably 2. And they're a playoff team. They'll be playing decently. I think the ceiling for this team is a 3 seed. I don't think they'll be better than that. I think the Pacers will probably be better, and the Cavs, of course. But behind that, I mean, anywhere between 3 or 4 all the way down to 7, I think that's where this team will be in the playoffs. That's my prediction right now. I like the composition of this roster. They have guys that can do everything. They have guys that can do one thing as role players, and I think that's a good makeup. One thing that may be a little bit concerning to me and other Hawks fans, they only have 2 true point guards. They're both young, fairly inexperienced, and Malcolm Delaney and Dennis Schroeder. Schroeder, I mean, he's very good, but he can be inconsistent at times, and when he's bad, you got to have that guy that can step in. I thought that guy was Jarrett Jack, but apparently the Hawks didn't. They cut him, and I don't know if I agree with the move, but I don't know everything they know. He may not be coming back from that injury as well as maybe he said he was. Or maybe just Malcolm Delaney is the better option. I've heard a lot of praise for Malcolm, and I'm excited to see what he can bring to this team. So I just hope he's that guy they can lean on when Schroeder goes Schroeder, as some people would say. One other thing about that point guard situation, it could tell you, it looks like this roster is set for the start of the season. I think they'll kick off opening day, or tip-off as it is in basketball, and with this roster, but it shows that additional moves can be made through trades, or maybe we see a player get cut from another team, which is unlikely, but maybe due to a trade they get cut, and the Hawks bring him in and drop somebody. So it just means additional moves could be made to get a veteran point guard, or maybe another player or two will play out of position at the point guard slot. Maybe DeAndre Bembry. I've heard he can play the 1, the 2, the 3, anywhere really. So it's just interesting, something to think about as we head into that 2016 and 17 NBA season.
And right, you were talking about their possible seeding for the playoffs should they get there in the spring. I think that they'll be at about the 6th seed, possibly the 5 seed this year. I'd say somewhere between 40 to 45 wins. I said 44 just because I like that number. But, I think the Cavs will take care of the East again, at least for the regular season. Anything can happen in the playoffs. Then the Warriors will win the West just because they have the better roster than anybody in the entire NBA right now. But I think the Hawks will do better than some people think. Like you said, ESPN said something about a 10 seed somewhere. No way. The Hawks will make the playoffs. They're good enough for that. They do have their superstar. They have Dwight Howard now, so it'll be interesting to see what his impact will be this year versus what Al Horford was for the past 8 years. So we'll be able to see that. And like you also touched on, the weak spot is the point guard situation. So that will also be interesting to see how Dennis Schroeder takes care of being the starting point guard this year. Because there's a little bit different feeling when you're the starting point guard versus coming off the bench. There's a little bit more pressure that way. And I think that we'll have to see how he handles it before we make any final assumptions about it.
Yeah, and I think Schroeder can be very good at times and also very bad. He's just got to limit the turnovers, and that's pretty much what I got for the Hawks today.
Yeah, so I'm excited for the Hawks season, and also some college basketball coming up soon. We'll make sure to talk about that as well. Alright, so we're going to finish up with the Falcons. Their game was in progress as we were recording the rest of our episode, so we put them off to the end, and after a little bit of a break, we were able to put in all their stats. They did end up losing a tough one, 33-30 to the Chargers in overtime in the Georgia Dome. That was definitely a tough pill to swallow. And Luke, what are your first thoughts?
Well, my first thoughts is that is terrible. I mean, I can't believe the Falcons blew the lead. The Chargers are terrible in the fourth quarter, but they were able to do just enough to come back. So obviously not a fan of this loss. Chargers are a very beatable team. but also the best 2-4 team in the NFL.
Now they're 3-4.
Yeah, now they're 3-4. But coming in, they were the best 2-4 team. Now they're probably the best 3-4 team. So, we'll give you a little bit of a stat line, a little bit of some analysis on that. Vic Beasley is still my player of the game. Has 6.5 sacks and 3 forced fumbles. So he's on pace for double-digit sacks this year. He is finally breaking out. I am just about ready to rip the bust label off of him that some other analysts had put on Vic Beasley. So I think he's going to have a great year, and he's a key part to this Falcons defense. Now, also looking forward to the offseason. They got to get that other guy. I know Dwight Freeney's looking pretty good so far, especially as an old dude, but I think a first or second round pick has to be invested on getting that second edge rusher. But
and they have been putting the first and second round picks in that category for a while now. They've been working on it, and I think it's finally starting to pay off. Like you said, they're still not completely there yet, but it's definitely better.
Yeah, they're getting there. Now, 4-3, yeah, not great. It's not a division game, though, with the Chargers being in the AFC, so it doesn't matter as much as maybe another loss could. But, that's just how it's going.
The division is winnable right now. You can check out my post on the website. You can always find us there, atlantasportspodcast.com, where I break down what the Falcons need to do to win the division this year. And if you look in there, the schedule's not extremely tough right now. They were supposed to have one of the toughest schedules, if not the toughest schedule in the NFL. But it's really, really dimmed down a little bit. I think they only play one team with a 500 record. No, the Rams lost. So I think that all the teams now have losing records. I know it's still early in the season, but that's still a big number to not have a team with a winning record on your schedule.
Yeah, it's a good thing. Is it Green Bay next week? Is that who it is?
Green Bay. That's the one. Actually, they're 500. So
okay. Yeah, because they just beat the Bears. Watched a little bit of that Thursday night football game. Looking forward, Green Bay looks to be a good team, but assuming Eddie Lacy is still out, the Falcons' defense will catch a little bit of a break. But back to the Chargers game. Vic Beasley was my top performer. I didn't think the Chargers would have enough to come back and beat the Falcons in the fourth quarter. They're missing Keenan Allen, Manti Te'o, Jason Verrett. I mean, they're missing some serious key players. They're all pretty much the number one guy at their position. I didn't think they'd have the depth to win, but they came out and did it. Their point differential coming into this game in the fourth quarter was -40. I thought it would drop with the Falcons' explosive offense, but I was wrong. So just to run through some stats, Frankie, get us started there.
So passing, Matt Ryan, 22 for 34. He had a touchdown and an interception. He was sacked 3 times, so you'd like to limit that number. Obviously, you'd like to have it 0, but the offensive line didn't have a great day today. Lots of false starts, and you'd like to limit that as well. That's more of a mental side of the game, something you can't really... You can teach it, but you have to remember that as your lineman, you have to know it. It's more mental, and the coaches can't make you do anything. Rushing, Tevin Coleman, 8 carries, 64 yards. Devontae Freeman, 15 for 58 yards. He had 4 yards per carry. Julio Jones had another big day, 9 receptions, 174 yards at the 50-yard bomb that Matt Ryan threw to him. And then Devontae Freeman also had 5 catches for 42 yards, so it's nice to see the running backs being used in the passing game as well. It does add another fold to the offense.
Yeah, Matt Ryan had 273 yards passing, got a milestone, record today. That's 46 consecutive games of 200-plus passing yards. So that number today will likely keep Matt Ryan above, or at least on the top of the NFL in terms of yardage, so he'll probably still be the yardage leader as a passer. And Julio, with his big day, those 174 yards on his 9 receptions that you just mentioned, Frankie. And that should probably keep him on the top of his list, too. So I think we have the best quarterback and the best receiver in the NFL. The defense has just got to get some more stops together, which I think, they're improving generally as a whole. And they just got to get some stops together, and the offense has maybe got to just limit the turnovers. I'm kind of pointing to Matt Ryan's interception there. Tried to force it to Julio and some good coverage. That's just got to stop. It happened a good bit last year, but once this year is kind of like, okay, Matt, don't get on that track. Don't develop that bad habit again. So if Matt can just stay away from that and limit that mistake, he'll be fine.
And then tackles, defensively, Devondre Campbell, 10 tackles and a tackle for loss. Keanu Neal had 9 tackles. He was also up there in the leading tackles. You don't really want to see your safeties I mean, it's good to see them making tackles and not missing them, but you don't want your safeties making tackles because that means that your defensive line and linebackers have allowed the running backs and the receivers to get through, and you'd appreciate that if they could just hold their ground there and make the tackles before the safeties get there, that'd be better. But Robert Alford, 2 breakups, and Beasley had 2 sacks. Reed and Claiborne had 1 sack. There was 4 total sacks in the game, which is definitely improved upon last year. Defense, they had 4 sacks, 6 QB hits, 7 tackles for loss, 7 breakups. They allowed 33 points. You'd like to limit that number, obviously. They also gave up 426 yards of total offense. That is also a number that you want to limit. You want to stay under the 200 mark if you can. And then Beasley strip sack, and then Adrian Claiborne returned the fumble for a touchdown. And Deion Jones had an interception as well. He gets some of that speed going. If he can get a pick in space and take off, he can really use that speed.
Yeah, Deion is fast. That's why they drafted him. A lot of people think overdrafted, but second round, it's kind of like, in my fantasy league, I'll overdraft a player if he's good, if I think he'll be good for me. That's what the Falcons did, and Deion is a good player. He does a very good job on that defense, and he'll probably go down as one of the better draft picks of the Dan Quinn era, and hopefully the Dan Quinn era won't end for a long time, so that's really saying a lot. Tevin Coleman had a hamstring injury today. He was listed as questionable to return. Didn't see him for the rest of the game, but hopefully he'll be okay. And Matt Bryant missed his first field goal of the year. Finally, it was a 58-yarder. He was perfect until then, had very good number, but it's just how it worked with Matt Bryant today, unfortunately. That field goal would have sent the game, or would have won the game for the Falcons, but unfortunately it went to overtime, and the Chargers made a stop and won the game. Unfortunately, I'm pretty unhappy about that one. But your Falcons fun fact of the day is that all Atlanta players with a single-digit number have the first name Matt. You have Matt Ryan, Matt Bryant, Matt Bosher, and Matt Schaub. So that's just your interesting fact of the day. It came from Falcons Twitter. So, there you go. We're just going to wrap up the show. I'd like to thank you for finding us however you did on our website, AtlantaSportsPodcasts.com, or on our Twitter account at ATL Sportscasts, or anywhere else, Stitcher Radio. We're pretty much everywhere. We're on YouTube. We make ourselves pretty easy to find, so please, if you can, spread the word. That's just going to be our best way of growing, and tell your friends about us if you like the show. And if you don't, or even if you do, we appreciate your feedback, and we'd like to thank you for watching.